sunshine we've had. We can put the arc away and we can get down to business. But it is nice to see the sun out. The first order of business is we had the minutes sent to us, and I thank Paul for putting that together. I don't know if we've all had a chance to read it, but does anybody have any additions or corrections that they want to make? If not, I will move that we approve the minutes. Thank you, Barry. I guess that nod is a yes.
Yes.
All in favor? Aye? Good. Thank you. We're going to hear from Professor Plattis, and he is, as as we know, but many of the people who may be listening to this will want a sort of a brief synopsis of his work. He's been contracted by the town to help us develop a commercial and economic development plan for Woodbridge. He's been through his phase one, which was a investigative phase that culminated in some broad impressions. We're now moving in of Woodbridge, its assets, its issues with regard to, hi Herb, the issues regarding to the development of our commercial district. And he's moving through phase two, and today we're going to hear from him on two issues. One is he is going to give us a report on his thoughts on the traffic study. The traffic study is a state endeavor to try to figure out what to do with the conversions of our two main arteries into New Haven and exit 59 on the Wilbur Cross, the Litchfield Turnpike, and the Amity Road. And those who commute and use that as a conduit to go to work or to get to the Parkway know that it's a pretty congested, difficult, and at times, most times, very annoying problem. So the state's going to try to figure out how it can be alleviated with all the constrictions, including the West River, the highway there, and the narrow roads, and the fact that
Merritt
Avenue Bridge, good point, and what can be done. So, Professor, why don't you give us some of your thoughts, and then he's going to update us on phase two, and you look very refreshed from a person that's been back and forth to China.
Well, don't let it fool you. I could drop over at any moment. My body thinks it's 4:08 in the morning. That's not too bad, I guess.
At least the sun is up. At least maybe you're
12-hour difference.
Yeah.
So we'll we'll keep this short and to the point. And the other issue that you're going to bring to the table to us is sort of an update on phase two, and what we have is what you have is a report and an item that you'll give us, I guess, next go round.
Right.
That has to do with the before and after view of how you see our commercial district.
Well, let's actually start with that, because as the chair mentions, at our last meeting, which I think was in April, the last meeting that I was at, 21st of April, we agreed that the next two meetings would take up two tasks as we move into phase two. That the first would be to have me draft a memo for discussion purposes, but eventually we hope for use by the commission, outlining what the commission might consider to be some of their issues with respect to the proposed DOT study of interchange 59 in the intersection. And I've done that. This is very clearly labeled draft memorandum for discussion, which is what we're up to this evening. And we'll come back to it. The second thing we suggested as a next meeting, which would have been this meeting if I'd been able to join you in May, would be to move into some more explicit design ideas by taking several key sites in the district that we're looking at and starting to give some ideas about a kind of before and after scenario for each one of them, to get as concrete, or to begin to get as concrete as we could about the kinds of things that might be done with respect to streetscape, signage, parking, traffic, and future development in the form of literal pictures of what you've got now and what you might have, and based on that, and based on discussions we would have with that, we could then work towards the kinds of standards, guidelines, specific recommendations that we would need to put into place to make those sorts of things happen as you move ahead. So that, I hope, we'll be able to do next time around. We're starting on that in the office, and I see no reason why we couldn't move in that direction pretty quickly. I don't want to get too far out in front of the commission. Sometimes when you have a month between meetings, you do more work than you
What is your schedule for July? Are you going to be traveling internationally, or are you going to be here? Or if you had enough traveling?
Knock on wood, I'm going to be here through July. And I've had, as you put it, enough traveling to keep me satisfied for the foreseeable future. So we're hoping to be moving ahead on a lot of fronts in July, and this is one of them. So that's where we think we're going. And it really, you know, I think the thrust of our discussion was, rather than to continue to have interesting but potentially inconclusive discussions at the realm of theory, that we would really jump in with both feet and get as concrete as we could about specific possibilities. And that we would do what we do best, which is not so much to talk but to draw and help you visualize some of these possibilities.
And consistent with your memo of what is going to be addressed during that presentation, why don't you give us a quick summary? For example, you know,
yeah.
talk about streetscape.
I think what we're going to try to do is to pick a few spots based on the discussions we've had already and the looks around that we've had with various members of the commission, where I think there's broad general agreement that things could work better with respect to all of these issues, maybe some in certain areas more than others, and to take some recognizable images, photographs of those sites, and then using those as a base to say, this is what we have now, and then in another set of images to move in a direction of future development. And to say, here, using some specific tools that are familiar to everybody, whether it's reconfiguring sidewalks or intersections or using landscaping or signage, but also predicting the potential future direction of development on those sites, to say, this is the kind of thing that might happen, is this what we're looking for? Rather than, you know, sort of guess what we're thinking. So our experience is that that gets to the core of things pretty quickly, because sometimes when people are just trying to outline their picture of things in words, we may think we're talking about the same thing, but we may not be. And if we put it in literal pictorial form, we're going to have a lot quicker time saying, no, that's not what we had in mind. It's too dense, or it's too suburban, or it's not suburban enough. And we can do that with a range of images as a draft in a way that will allow people to have input and then move ahead again towards things that are more explicit. So that's where we think we're going with the next meeting, and that to us is a good way of really, as I said before, jumping in the deep end of trying to get down to brass tacks.
Does anyone on the commission have any questions? Because I know this was a topic of conversation that we had in terms of what we're going to get as deliverables from this phase 2.
Yeah, and the intention here at this point is not so much to get right to the deliverables, but to use the work that we do to position ourselves as clearly as possible. And depending on what what the commission feels about the stuff that we discuss, you may want to shop it around to other people as well. And that's easy enough to do because you've got something that is an explicit image that you can circulate judiciously, or you can even put it on your website and say, what do you think of this? Okay. So back to the memo.
Well, let's, before we deal with the memo, Professor Barry, you had a comment?
No, what I was trying to figure out when you said back to the memo, I kind of answered my question, but what you're describing does not necessarily play into...
No, this is
separate. Different.
Right, this was task 1, and then the pictures are task 2.
Yep.
So task 1 was to try to put down some thoughts about the proposed DOT study. And these are not even remotely carved in stone at this point, because what I tried to do was just scratching my own head and thinking back on discussions we've already had to throw out as many issues as I could think of and to put them before you so that we can say, yes, those issues are important, or no, that one's not important and you're leaving out these other issues. Now, having said that, I say very clearly in the introduction that what I'm not doing is rehashing the things that the DOT proposed scope of services already highlights. Because we're just going to start with that as a baseline and assume that that's what they intend to do. And the purpose of this memo is to think of other issues that touch upon the work of this commission that may not be as obvious from the DOT scope of services. So I don't know whether we want to go back and review that. I have a copy of it with me. I don't know how many of you have looked at it in detail. There's been some discussion of it. You got a response memo from Terry Gilbertson that called out a couple of things that were areas of concern. And the other thing that I want to make clear is that this is not meant as a criticism of their scope of services. It's really you talking to them and saying, yes, we're really happy that you're going to do this, and here are some of the things that we're working on. Can you, in the course of your study, think about some of these as well? That's really meant to be the spirit of it, not to say, we hate your scope of services, here's our scope of services. So we start with their scope of services, and we, I think, start from the shared conviction that the issues they are explicitly addressing, namely safety and flow of traffic at 6 locations that they highlight, are things that we all want them to do. And that this is taking some modest steps beyond that and saying, here's what's on our mind. So,
as we move into this, maybe, Ed, you'd want to give us, is there an update that may have happened in the last month that might be pertinent to this?
Well, I can tell you I have the name of the project manager for the DOT on this, and I'll give that to you, Alan. And then you maybe want to contact him.
I'd be happy to. And I assume their next step is to solicit
I don't know exactly
proposals
where the study is at the moment, but we did have a meeting with the Commissioner of Transportation, the all the area mayors and first selectmen. He was unable to make it, but his deputy came, and I raised the issue about this study. He was unfamiliar with it. He was going to get back to me. He still hasn't gotten back to me, but we did get the name of the person within the DOT who's doing project manager, so he's the man to talk to at this point, so maybe Alan can...
Yeah. Well, I think the best way to do this, since I didn't get this to you ahead of time, and we've, there are 2 pages here, is to take the bullet points one by one, and you know, if you feel that they're highlighting issues that you would like to put out there, good, fine. If you have things that you think could be said more clearly, or if you think I'm, you know, chasing something that is not of particular concern to this commission, there's a little bit of redundancy between these, which is maybe not such a bad thing, but we'll see as we go along. So having, you know,
Before you launch on that, just a question, and I haven't had a chance to read this. Does the memorandum contain recommendations?
Yeah, I wrote it in the form of a memorandum to you, but it's phrased as ultimately a memorandum from your commission to the DOT, saying, we're glad you're doing this study. Here are some of the things that we're concerned about in the area. We would be really thrilled if your study could also help us think about these in a collaborative way. You know, and part of the issue is just to highlight your role, because if you've read the scope of services, it provides for meetings, 4 meetings with stakeholders and 2 public meetings. Now, this commission could easily be considered a stakeholder, but I think we all agree that you have a special role with respect to this, that what the DOT might do to improve that intersection will impact unavoidably and directly your ability, our ability to make the kinds of improvements that we'd like to in that district. And more importantly, it's a huge opportunity, because if they're going to end up making some real improvements there and spending the kind of money that it'll take to do that, if those can reinforce the kinds of things that the Commission would like to see happen, it's a giant step ahead.
Well, let me put this in the context also of the flood problem on the West River. And the state has agreed to fund a new Merritt Avenue bridge. So the state will be paying 80% for that, the town will be paying 20%. We have just had a contract approved by Cardinal Engineering that's going to design the new Merritt Avenue bridge. And as part of that design, they're going to do a flood study to see whether the removal of the dam at Pond Lily, which is in New Haven, which is owned by the New Haven Land Trust, would alleviate flooding in that area. And so that's part of the study. We hope that that study will be completed by the end of the year. As part of that study, there may be a recommendation to realign the Merritt Avenue Bridge with Lucy Street.
Yeah.
So this DOT study of traffic is maybe interrelated to the study for the Merritt Avenue
Well,
Bridge.
as you see, I have a bullet point on that. It's not terribly detailed. We may want to beef it up, but I took that into account. I didn't know exactly where it was. But
So maybe with if you contact the gentleman who's in charge for DOT, maybe you can have some kind of discussion with him about that. And then maybe he can come to one of our meetings here.
I mean, all of those things seem to be in the spirit of what we're suggesting. Let's,
Is there an extra copy?
I'm sorry, sure, I do. Sorry, Zach. Now, one more copy, sorry.
Thank you.
2 more copies. Anybody else? Okay.
And just to let you know, there's been a West River committee formed of residents in that area who are very concerned about the flooding aspect. And we had a meeting the other day with Representative Claridis, who is going to use whatever influence she has to make sure that this DOT study is on track and hopefully done.
Well, when I get to that, I will throw out a couple of other ideas that I think might relate to that, that I think could be also very good for the broader goals that you have in mind for the district. I mean, obviously, just like making traffic move better and safer, controlling flooding is a kind of no-brainer. The real trick is, if somebody's going to spend money doing that, can it also at the same time improve other things? And I think there are some opportunities there. So if we can, let's just go through these point by point. I'll read them out loud. You can follow along. That's probably the most efficient way to do it. It also gets them on the record. The first bullet point is Route 15 and Interchange 59, with its ramps, landscaping, lighting, and signage, are a critical part of this major gateway to the whole town of Woodbridge and its principal commercial district. And the Commission urges that appropriate consideration be given to the ways in which improvements to the safety and flow of traffic in this area can also contribute to a sense of local arrival and identity, as well as the enhancement of both the function and aesthetics of this important mixed-use district as it develops. What's the agenda for that? The agenda is very simple, which is that when the DOT talks about design, they generally mean it in the narrow sense of how wide the road is and where it goes. To design a road or a bridge for them is to get from point A to point B. What we like them to do, which they of course do in many situations where they are given this as an agenda, is to include the broader sense of design as making things look better. But not just making things look better, making things look like Woodbridge, not just like some generic highway intersection. What that might mean, I don't think we want to get too explicit about at this point, because that's when they start saying, whoa, you know, that's not what we want to do, though, is put that as an item for discussion on the table. If you're going to build this thing, if you're going to make new signage, new lighting, all the landscaping, all the stuff that goes along with reconfiguring a highway intersection, is there a way we can do that that is attractive and contributes to the sense that you've just gotten off the highway and you're in Woodbridge as a specific place? And some of that may be as simple as signage, but some of it may, you know...
Or some combination of which you might have a sidewalk or lamps or things.
So that's kind of jumping out there and saying, hey guys, you know, this is not just any old intersection, this is our intersection. Second point.
How much influence do we have on aesthetic issues like that?
My experience is that
the money is, that's more money rather than the vanilla.
My experience is that it varies dramatically, and timing is everything. If you have this discussion after they've already designed it and say, you know, the design doesn't look so great, can we do this, this, and this? I think you have less of a chance to influence it. If you enter the discussion up front, a lot of what you'd want to do wouldn't cost any more than what they're going to do anyway. It might have to do with where the landscaping goes, how it's done. They have certain standards that have to do with not blocking lines of sight. You know, you can't plant tall vegetation in certain areas, only low vegetation. But they're going to do it. They're going to. I mean, part of their project is tearing up the landscape and then restoring it to some degree. So I think if there's a discussion about that before they've made their designs, and I've been part of both situations. It's, you know, and again, it's always a little bit of a struggle. I'll give you an example that probably some of you know. There was a point in the design of the new Quinnipiac River Bridge, the Q Bridge, or what's it called officially, the Memorial Bridge, in Pearl Harbor Memorial Bridge, where people in New Haven, including the city and city planning department, said, whoa, you know, couldn't this bridge look a little bit nicer than a kind of standard issue highway bridge that could be anywhere? And there was some, I think, some fairly tough bargaining around that. And in fact, the standard of design was raised at some expense to make the bridge, we hope in the end, look nicer. Now, in the current budget situation, I think there's been some pullback from that as well. But we're not talking about, you know, something on that scale. That's an enormous project. But at a modest level, I think the other thing that's worth, that's on our side historically, is that the Parkway, I think, is generally recognized as one of the important scenic assets in the state of Connecticut. And again, you may remember that parts of the Parkway were up for redesign a number of years back, and there was a rather big preservation push not to destroy the character of it, and there was a book written about the Merritt Parkway at that time, and I think there's a broader awareness that highway building in the era when the Parkway was made tended to be a rather more thoughtful process, and I think so I think there's some grounds. This is not Interstate 95. This is part of the Parkway system, and I think there's a legitimate argument that it's not just a vehicle for moving cars from one place to another.
As we go through this, if you could maybe think about a comparable interchange, maybe down in Fairfield,
Yeah,
that has set a precedent, that we could point to.
that's a good idea. That's a very good idea. Well, I'll
Route
see.
7 in Norwalk, maybe, is a design idea, I don't know, that would fit.
Well, no, but,
That's a major, thoroughfare.
yeah,
So that we wouldn't be saying,
Route 8,
this is
actually, Route
unique.
8 interchange.
Yeah, we could use some existing examples
yeah.
to say you did it here.
What's fairly unique, and I make this point later on, is that in most places the Parkway enters communities at their edge rather than, I mean, that area is not the middle of Woodbridge, but it's a pretty built-up area. And if you think about the whole corridor, that is an above-average developed area. So I think there are other sensitivities.
Maybe there's some in Hammond, but if you look down
Yeah.
all along that corridor, maybe in Bridgeport near the mall area, that's a high, but it's still, that's pretty,
But that's
rural.
still
I mean, that's still
yeah.
not in the center of commerce like we have our exhibit. That's a good point. Okay.
So point two, to this end, yeah, sorry.
Point one, just in terms of anticipating, assuming that we plant the seed that a sense of arrival in Woodbridge, that's conveyed in the memorandum, how much time before would you guess before we would need to express a vision of what that would look like?
I think what we're trying to do is open the door to a discussion, and then if their response to us is, okay, but what, let's show us what you think that looks like, or make some suggestions. I would feel more comfortable with a kind of invitation or mandate to do that. But their response might be, well, we're going to retain people who can help us do that. And I think they should be given the opportunity to say which of those procedures is, I mean, obviously as designers, we're perfectly comfortable making some pictures of it with your collaboration. But if what DOT wants to do is to say, okay, we've heard you, we'll come back with what we think we can do, and you tell us what you think. I think that's also a reasonable position. Because again, I mean, it always depends in these situations who you're working with at DOT. I've had a range of experience with that. So it also depends on who ends up getting the contract to do this. If they're a firm that has in-house landscape design capabilities, as some of the big civil engineering firms that do traffic studies do, they may be able to give us a little extra value from their own resources. I mean, the firms differ. There are transportation planners who would answer an RFQ like this or RFP like this who are strictly transportation people, highway people. And then there are some firms that might answer that also have not just civil but also landscape and site planning in-house, and would be in a position to say, here's an example of how we've done it. So, if they've had a DOT contract before and successfully executed an attractive landscape design, they're in a relatively strong position to say, we could do it this way, and here's what it cost when we did it this way.
Ed, did you have that?
Well, I was just going to say that we know that the Merritt Parkway intersects with commercial areas in Stamford, Norwalk, Trumbull, and I guess and Trumbull, and in Stratford to some extent, but that's a little different. So those are 4 areas where they've had they've done this.
Well, let's all set ourselves the assignment of, since we
Bridgeport
all,
is not on the parkway.
we all drive, we
Oh, yeah.
all drive back and forth from time to time. Why don't we think about which of the intersections might be, in our minds, somewhat similar in character or treatment, or might, for us, set a standard of the way we'd like it to happen. Because one of the possibilities is that you heavily landscape the area so that when you arrive in an area that's more of a rural and green feel, and then you drive a block and you start to get into a more developed area. Right now, it's a kind of nothing situation. It's wide open, so you can see across parking lots and auto dealerships and some of the distant views are very nice, but the close views aren't very well managed at the present time. So you've got a big asset there, which is that, as I said, the distant views are quite special of West Rock and of the hills. If you can combine that with a better management of the foreground, could be pretty nice.
Okay.
So, point 2. To this end, the Commission suggests that there be close and continuous coordination between their ongoing design and economic development study, that's what we're doing here, of the area and the proposed DOT study with respect not only to large-scale planning issues, such as the location and configuration of ramps and intersections, but also the relevant details of landscape lighting and signage, so that those aspects of any proposed improvements both satisfy DOT requirements and are compatible with standards for local streetscape being developed through the EDC study. And there is some negotiating room here if, again, we get in early on. There is a kind of standard palette that the DOT uses, but there are some choices within that palette. And issues like lighting, as I'm sure you're aware, can make a huge difference in people's perception of the place, both its safety and its approachability. So that's just, again, it's just a way of saying, we're working on some of these issues with respect to local streets. Let's compare notes and make sure that these things work together. Third, the configuration, alignments, and points of connection of highway ramps to the local street network are vital to the proper functioning of that network for local vehicular and pedestrian traffic, as well as for vehicular traffic entering and exiting Route 15. Currently, the configuration of both Interchange 59 and the local street network conspire to create a situation that is far from ideal for both local commercial and residential traffic and regional traffic, and even more discouraging for pedestrians. In particular, north-south traffic, whether regional or local, moves almost exclusively on Route 69 and 63, while east-west traffic is badly served by a non-hierarchical and poorly aligned set of local streets. I apologize for the jargon, I'm sort of talking their language there, but these are points that we've been over in discussions in this committee, and what we're referring to is the fact that all the traffic north-south, local and regional, is carried by 69 and 63. That's it. There's really no other. There are some block-long north-south streets, but they don't get you anywhere. So whether you're driving, to a local destination, just up to Bradley Road or something like that, or whether you're going all the way through Woodbridge, to Bethany, you're on the same road. And that because there's no street grid there and there's no hierarchy. And east-west, all of those cross streets are about the same. None of them are, substantially different in that they're meant to handle the exiting and entering traffic from the highway. So it's an invitation to the DOT to think about the way their intersection meshes with the local situation. We've already been thinking about it a little bit. I think they'll get what, and this is something I can discuss with the project manager, but I don't think they'll have any trouble understanding. I mean, one of the issues, for example, is going to come up in another couple of bullet points, is the one that you've already mentioned, which is the lack of alignment between Lucy Street and Merritt. So that again, you have no choice if you want to get over to the east side of 69. You have to turn onto 69 and use 69 to then jog over to, I mean, this is not an ideal situation. And people are already thinking about addressing it. But basically, the whole area works that way if you think about it.
So what authority does DOT have over local streets? Do they have any?
No, but they could make suggestions to you and say, here's what we're going to do. If we're going to do this, it makes sense for you to do this now or in the future. Or you could have that conversation in the other direction, which is you could say to them, here's what we'd like to do. How does that influence what you're going to do? You know, a lot of it has to do with where these ramps come out. You know, where do you want to put that traffic to then distribute it most efficiently to various directions? Right now, in effect, Route 69 is working as an extension of the highway ramp, because the highway ramp puts you out in a place where you have to then drive one way or another up 69 to get most of the other places that you want to go. So it turns Litchfield Pike into more of the exit ramp system, just because of where it puts you out. You can't distribute from there without going. In other words, if I want to go back to wherever, Stop and Shop, unless I start cutting through people's parking lots, the only thing I can do is go all the way back to the light in New Haven, turn through that very difficult intersection, and go back to the Stop and Shop. And there's, you know, there are better ways to do that.
And the design would also encompass feeding lanes onto the highway, because if you look at the entrance from Amity, you have to come to a stop. It merges with another entrance from Litchfield.
Yeah.
And when they've configured some of the new ramps,
Yeah.
they have created a flow, an entrance lane, if you will. Instead of a complete stop, you can come up and work a yield.
Yeah, they know this stuff better than I do, actually, and this
So
is
that would be part of their plan
just to
to
remind
consider
them that in effect, you know, our local network of streets, we know needs to be better, and it's got to coordinate with what the highway.
And that's a factor that would be taken into account with their study.
I would hope so. I would hope so. And I think that again, you know, they may not have the mandate to actually say, you know, we're going to improve your local system, although if they impact it, they may be on the hook to help you make the improvements that you need. As I say, right now, you've got local roads that function as part of their highway network, because the interchange doesn't do what the interchange needs to do in terms of putting you down on the ground.
Given the proximity, and not to belabor the point, but in Litchfield, for example, and Amity, there's virtually no way to expand that because there's no shoulder. It comes right up to commercial development. So it's conceivable they could take land to widen the road. That they do, don't they?
Sure.
And that in turn could have a ripple effect on what we do with making an intersection a 90-degree as opposed to what exists now, or what happens to local
Well,
streets.
and in the next point, we're going to say what I already have said, which is whatever you're doing, as you do it, think about the pedestrian issue as well. So we go on to say, with respect to pedestrians, there is no consistent or continuous network of coordinated, comprehensively designed sidewalks, pathways, and crosswalks. Improvements in this area, with the goal of supporting both local business development and quality of residential life and access, will again require close coordination of DOT and local planning and design standards. We recognize that it is not common to have a major limited access highway interchange so thoroughly implicated and enmeshed with a local neighborhood and small-scale commercial district. But this is the case in this area, and improvement should be sensitive to the need for greater compatibility with both auto-oriented and pedestrian-oriented uses and patterns. Furthermore, a more pedestrian-friendly environment could have the long-term result of reducing local vehicular trips even as development intensifies, which I think speaks to one of their potential concerns as outlined in the study, which is how is development, one of the things that they need to do is to look ahead and try to anticipate what level of development is going to occur in this area so they can design not for what's there right now, but to design for future development. And if we can say to them, what we'd like to see happen going forward is that that development, whatever it might be, is more pedestrian friendly, so that maybe we can eliminate some of the local trips that are occurring right now, and that then improves the overall capacity of the system.
Sure.
Again, I'm saying that because I know that DOT at the highest levels is trying to be more sensitive to those issues.
Good.
And so whether, you know, the local people are plugged in yet or not, I think there's a general move in that direction on the part of DOT. Attention should be paid to the flow of traffic on both routes 69 and 63, particularly southbound flow into the Gateway District, which in distinction to northbound flow from New Haven, has very few required stops and little of the sort of traffic calming appropriate for regional traffic moving through local commercial areas until it actually arrives at the highway ramp intersections, where it then tends to back up. We've talked about this before, and it's pretty obvious once you think about it. If you're coming into Woodbridge from the south on Whaley Avenue, you've already long before slowed down because you've been stopped at almost every intersection, including some major bottleneck intersections. So it's a totally different experience than flying down the hill from here back into that area. And the point is that if you're trying to make a commercial district, you want to start to slow people down a little bit in both directions. In the long run, what it does is it spreads out the traffic in a way that makes it less frustrating for people than flying into, from a one speed zone to another speed zone and then coming to a screeching halt at a light and sitting there for a period of time. That's not normally compatible with making a good commercial district.
Does the DOT take account of cars that are destined and want to use that artery to get onto the Wilbur Cross? They want to take account of commuting traffic that wants to get into New Haven, so as they figure out what to do, they'll know what the count is.
One of the things that they will try to do is to get numbers on what traffic is going where and characterize that. Because what they have to try to do is not just to estimate overall capacity, but estimate capacity for different lanes and decide whether they need more lanes.
So they may do a survey one morning, one evening? And
well, if they're doing it right, they'll do it more than one morning, one evening. You try to do it over a period of time. You try to do it on weekends. Ideally, you have some studies that deal with, peak seasonal loads, if those...
Because that could help us in determining how to use the area. If we know that there's a lot of local traffic or traffic that goes up to Naugatuck or up to...
Yeah, I think intuitively what most of us know is that you've actually got a lot of different kinds of traffic going through there. And that's part of what creates the conflicts, because some people just want to get through it as fast as they can, and others are headed for a local destination. Other people are coming home to Woodbridge from work in the afternoon, and they have a different experience of it than somebody who is on a more long distance route. And so I think that the study should help you characterize that.
Do they share those numbers with us before, or do they share it with us after the report is written? It's part of the addendum?
I would think that if they're doing this with a series of meetings as they go along, my experience with these kinds of studies, and we've been involved with some of the COG studies, the SCROG studies of this kind, is that generally as the engineers collect data, they put it up on the screen and show it to you.
Okay.
Typically what they'll do what traffic engineers will do is they'll come into a meeting and they'll have slides of each intersection that they're looking at. And they will say, you know, here's what's happening at this intersection in terms of numbers as far as we know, and here's what we think the problems are. They'll also have accident counts, and they'll try to describe what's causing those accidents. So,
Is part of our routine here to pick off some of this traffic that's coming through to get them to shop
Yeah.
at Woodbridge?
I
That's part of our,
right, sure, right, which is why you want to make them aware of the fact that they're moving through a commercial district, and that the rules of the commercial district apply as they're doing that. But having said that, that's also why I note that it is somewhat unusual to have an intersection like this that dumps regional traffic right into the middle of a commercial district. Generally, you have that happen at the edge, or if it does, what you've got is big scale, you know, shopping center, shopping mall type development, the kind that you get around the periphery of cities or that you get out on Route 1. You know, think about the intersections of 95 and Route 1, or the parkways and Route 1. I mean, that's usually a completely different scale of development than what you're going for, what you have, and what you ultimately want to have in this area. So there's work to be done. It's not the most straightforward situation.
Okay.
Question, when and how will we come up with the design of some of the local streets, assuming that the DOT study is really focused around the ramps and not the hierarchy of the surface streets? You know, and I'm just imagining that the requirement of traffic engineering.
I think that's going to happen pretty quickly. And I think that, I mean, one of the obvious things is if everybody's pretty much committed to rebuilding the Merritt Street Bridge and aligning Lucy and Merritt, that starts to make Lucy into a completely different kind of street than it is now. It becomes a cross connector that sort of skewers the whole eastern part of the district, and I think it then performs a different role than some of the other streets, and that probably has implications for how that is designed and how it's used. So, you know, I think those things happen pretty quickly out of the decisions that you make. The diagram that we drew a long time ago, which is purely theoretical, it just says using arrows and dotted lines, what we want to do is connect this area over here to that area over there in the most direct way possible, because that's how the whole thing's going to work together. And then the point is that if we were working in a conventional downtown, and I may have mentioned this before, what you typically get in a street grid, as the street grid develops over time, are what urban planners call A streets and B streets. And the A streets are the main streets, and the B streets perform a kind of secondary role. And let's take an example that we all know. Chapel Street in New Haven is an A street. Relative to Chapel Street, Crown Street is a B street. You know, so the A street is the preferred commercial or even residential address. And the B street gets secondary uses like parking, garages, in the case of Crown Street, nightclubs and restaurants and bars. And if you think about downtowns that you know, certainly traditionally so you kind of get ABA. So every other street in a downtown, sometimes every third street, might be a more significant street. It might have actually gotten wider over time. In the case of New Haven, the big streets were wider to begin with, and the cross streets that divided the blocks later, like Wall Street and Crown Street, were narrower secondary streets. Not alleys. That's another issue. So what I'm saying is that what your area lacks right now is that kind of logic. There are aspects of it there, and what we want to do is, I think, tease it out so it works better. And everybody sort of understands that if we're taking a local trip, this is the street, or if we're walking, this is the street that we want to be on. If we're cutting through from one side to another, this is the street that we want to be on. And typically the bigger streets that handle more traffic, even if they're not literally bigger, would be signalized. And the secondary streets might just have stop signs.
I mean, I listen to you and I keep thinking this is why we're fortunate to have you here. And for those that may be unaware of your background, because we haven't mentioned it today, you're with Yale, and you have experience in this area, and not only traffic issues, but of economic development, use of commercial property, and supporting whatever would be our goal of increasing the use of that property. So we're fortunate, in a way, not that I'm trying to sell your skills to other people, but this is the economies of scale we're reaching.
I can assure you that I didn't learn these things in school. But the reason we found ourselves starting to understand these things is because we start with the kinds of issues that your commission has. Economic development issues, design issues, how do we make things work better and look better. But to get to those, we find out that we have to understand the way that stuff like traffic and parking works. That's not what most of my students set out to do.
Sorry for that aside.
They find out very quickly that urban design is about 60 to 70% traffic planning.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. So then a couple of other points in no particular order. Drainage and stormwater management issues in this area present an opportunity to use grading and landscaping in a more innovative and attractive way to address these issues. And what I'm calling out here is what's happening in a lot of places is that stormwater management, even where it's not a huge problem, just a conventional problem, is more and more thought of as integrated with the way in which you handle landscaping. There are strategies that you can use that simultaneously make the place look better, but also help you manage the stormwater. And it's not just the West River in the case of this area, although that's an obvious example, but it's also that you have these impromptu geese ponds in the middle of your highway ramps because the water's not draining, it's just sitting there. And so you get a couple of days of heavy rain and you've got a nice, large, shallow, stagnant pond for a few days in the intersection. The geese like it, but it's not particularly attractive or healthy or anything else. And what we're urging them to do here is that when they restore a landscape after they've made improvements, to use state-of-the-art techniques, things like bioswales and landscaping that helps absorb and manage, retain, and/or distribute the stormwater. And also, of course, in the best of all possible worlds, they'd be using, eventually, if we all live long enough, materials for the paving and sidewalks themselves that are, instead of being totally impervious, that themselves help to percolate the water back into the ground so it doesn't just puddle or stream off them. This is being done more aggressively in some parts of the world than it is in the U.S., but I think the U.S. is eventually going to get there.
Okay.
Consideration should be given to plans for a new bridge across the West River and the potential rationalization of the Merritt Street, Lucy Street alignment in connection with this project. In general, there is a need for improved access to the the area east of Route 69. So I'm being pretty diagrammatic about this. We may want to say more because we know more is going to happen, but it is, I think what you say is absolutely obvious, which is that if that's going to happen anyway, the DOT wants to coordinate their study with that. In addition to, or as part of the stakeholder and public meetings outlined in the proposed DOT scope of services, provision should be made for discussions and working sessions to coordinate with the ongoing EDC Gateway District study as suggested above. That's just a reminder that they might find it worth their while to spend a little bit of time with us, apart from the other meetings. Finally, consideration should also be given to the new level of mixed-use development under consideration by the EDC study and its implications not only for vehicular trip generation, but also for future use of public transit in the area, as well as pedestrian and bicycle alternatives to local vehicular trips. I think if you all are successful, and over the next couple of decades, this area does improve and get livelier and have more development, it seems to me that that one way to think about how it works is to think that in the future we may have a little bit better public transit service to this area as well. And that the DOT may want to be thinking about it. Well, they may want to, they should be thinking about that at this point. I mean, I think the rules of the game should be changing in most places, especially Connecticut, and that nobody should be doing highway projects without at the same time thinking about how those might relate to transit alternatives, not just buses or streetcars or whatever they may be, but also bicycles and pedestrian activity. So,
Any questions that we have as we digest what you said?
One quick question.
fire away.
Timeline
Yeah.
on these type of projects and your expertise, how long does a traffic study like this usually take?
Well, I can't remember what their timeline is, but
I think the heading said was it 18 months? 18 to 24 months.
that sounds right. I mean, if you're going to have the number of meetings that they say they're going to have, even if they can do it faster, you probably don't want them to do it faster. You want to sort of spread it out. And I don't think you're going to miss any big budget windfalls in the next year or two in terms of construction. So you might as well take your time and do it right and hope that when the budgets are a little bit robust again, you'll be able to move ahead and actually do this stuff.
Do we know from the scope of services when they were going to actually start this?
I couldn't figure that out. I think they just circulated the draft. That's why it'll be useful for me, I suppose, to talk to the project engineer or project manager and say,
I think the best thing, we can get him to come to one of our meetings here would be great.
fine. Well, here's my suggestion. You've got copies of this, we've been through it. Take another look at it, jot down any comments that you might have. You can email them to me, or fax them to me, or collect them in a central location and then get them to me. Because I think one of the things that would make sense if we're okay with the direction here is to go ahead then and with whatever additional feedback, put this in the form of a memo to the DOT that we could use as a starting point for the discussion.
Question, as an example, do we know whatever happened with the meetings in Orange? Didn't they have these kind of stakeholder meetings when they were working on the design of the Orange ramps? I remember seeing in the paper these ads for that.
I wasn't involved with that, but I'm sure they did have, most of their projects now, they do have at least some public input. Sometimes it's after the fact, but
Do we have any way of finding out, Roger, how that went and what happened there?
I don't. I guess we could try to find out,
That'd be helpful.
there, or maybe
These are the orange ramps.
Yeah, I just remember seeing in
Mary Parkway?
I remember seeing DOT advertising these kinds of stakeholder meetings of people living and working in the area of the ramp in Orange.
For 34th, the ramps that...
There was on the 34th, I think, Crescent Hill Road. Apparently they're doing some design work for those ramps. And that was just pretty recent. So it looks like they are looking at this area for design. And since that was done so close in time,
Well, maybe if we bring this gentleman down here, we can get that information out of him.
Yeah, see where they are, where they might have one.
Let's find out, what they may have done and how that might be useful to us. Before, Alan, you leave, first of all, are there any questions on?
And I just want to reiterate, I think the suggestion of identifying some precedents in the form of intersections that are similar enough to what you'd like to see happen in the positive sense, because I think it always helps to say to people, whether they're private developers or public authorities, we've seen what you've done here, and that's the kind of thing that we're hoping for in our town.
Okay. So we'll all take a look at the Merritt and Wilbur Cross and see if we can identify by exit number what might be comparable and what might be something we want to look at. Good. Off Highway Route 15 exits. Before you leave, maybe we'll just modify the agenda here and let me touch upon point number 5, which you and I talked about very briefly. And I apologize, I haven't really had a chance to talk to Ed about this because I've been away. But when I worked for the RGP and I went to these conferences, I would hear several times, on more than one occasion, that foreign companies like to locate a regional office, a headquarter office, in a location that has 4 of these qualities. Number one, they like to be, not all the time, but a significant number of times. They want to be near, but not in a large geographic area. They want to be in New York necessarily, but they want to have access to be near New York or Boston. Second, they want to be next to and in a town of a world-class university, and obviously we have that with Yale. Third, they want to be in an area that has the amenities of a large city, of which we have a disproportionate large number of those amenities. Those amenities may be restaurants, cultural events, access to recreation areas, and we certainly qualify for that. And certainly they want educational value for their kids and the quality of living that comes from an area. So with that, I was thinking that maybe we as a town could look at this model and say, does it apply? And would this be a good use of of an outreach program to sample some businesses, some foreign companies, particularly China, and I'll tell you why China sort of came to mind, to see maybe that would be a way to populate some of these areas that are vacant now or that could be developed with this in mind for these type of offices. The to develop a reputation in our area for this type of company, and that's the genesis of this point. I bring it out to open discussion because and Alan and I have had a brief discussion on this. And Alan, you're going to maybe check with some of your colleagues. You're over China, but that doesn't mean that that your trips there have helped us with this problem. But you know China better than we, and maybe this has some merit. Go ahead, Diane.
I actually want to bring up a counterpoint, but I don't know if Professor Plaza needs to be honest. When I went to the Orange Corp's Economic Day for commerce, and they had Mike Moran from the university, who you probably know, Professor, speak, and he had a really interesting chart of this census. So, in 2000, for the first time in the history of New Haven County, in every town, the majority of people worked outside of the town. Woodbridge led the group, but we're like at 90%. So here's the flip side, which is interesting. Do Woodbridge residents, Steve Moore and I were laughing, we're the two that live in Woodbridge.
You're the 10%.
But do they not work here because there aren't offices and the support systems that they need? Or are there other, forces driving it? And you know, with energy and all of that, and for sustainability of towns, the whole purpose is to get people, the whole drive is to get people to live and work locally. I'm just throwing that out, since you brought global, I'll bring it down to the local, which is something that I think we should talk about in the future to try to get a handle on. We lead the pack.
And in fairness, this concept of a foreign company having interest is not necessarily in Woodbridge, but it's the region. West New Haven and its surrounding areas would be a very attractive place. But to get to your point, I think the figure that I remember back a few years ago, we had 42% that worked in New Haven.
Wow.
42%, which was an exceptionally high number, which will surprise you given the number of professionals, Yale professors, doctors, lawyers, businessmen, who have reason to have offices and be part of the New Haven community. But anyway, so yes, I think that is an interesting point. And it's an adjunct to what we're saying. Maybe we should. And now, to some degree, the Woodbridge offices, the Schaefer family has developed right across the street on that concept. Yep. That maybe doctors don't want to travel as much, and people don't want to go as far. And they have their clientele or their patients from this area, and that's more convenient. So that may add a lot of credence to what you're talking about.
Or then the other point, 42% live in work in New Haven. Think how difficult that is then for Woodbridge, the Woodbridge Commercial District. When you're in this, I know when I worked in the city, I dropped off my kids, dropped off my laundry, everything's right there. You do it, then you come home and you enjoy your house. So I think these are things, they're challenges
that we should
explore.
Well, what I like about the discussion is we're talking about potential targets. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about target markets.
No, that's what's really at.
Yeah, and you've brought that point up, and I think that's what we're trying to do, is focus in on some of those issues. I throw this out, not that this is the cure-all, and this may not even be the decent idea, but it's the concept of trying to look for an audience, or look for a group of people that would want to. We're not trying to force fit them. Right. We're trying to capitalize on what they're looking for and say, hey, we have those qualities right here. Look seriously at what we could provide.
Well, I think, and Dr. Plavas, you probably help here, but if you have some core services, then it's also an attraction. We have some restaurants kicking around and things like that, but if we were to enhance some of those services, maybe more restaurants spread out differently, we got enough dry cleaners to take care of the entire state, but that we would strategically try to identify what are some of those core services people like where they go to work. As you said just a minute ago, I like to go to work, drop this off, drop that off, those kinds of things. That might help our ability to sell the community. That we think on that level, and we think about who that target market is, and we drive toward it. And you have more than one. You're talking about one, Roger's talking about a different one, but we have 2 or 3 of them.
And this is the segue into this piece that I'm handing out, which is a continuation of, Alan, here's a couple for you too. We have an opportunity to be part of this UI regional development conference or meeting that's going to take place in August. And we also need to provide some narrative for the COG website that's being expanded and made more useful, capitalizing on the phrase that I believe the mayors and first selectmen agreed to, which was characterizing our region as Connecticut's cutting edge. So all cities and towns will have an opportunity to put a message into their website. Their message, this is the draft. So I would like everyone to sort of mull it over a little bit and see how it might be modified. And then we'll feed our recommendations or our thinking into Ed, and then he'll finally craft this to I guess, your liking, the board's liking. But I think we have an opportunity to make an input. So I circulate this so that we can read it over and then maybe we'll have a discussion in July and try to come up with, or maybe you can just pass along some areas. I don't know, Ed, what would be the best way?
What does this do?
I didn't see a due date on that. Again, I guess Judy at COG could answer that, but in the communication that I saw, it wasn't, there was no due date. It was being, you know, they were populating the fields in their website. So,
Do you have any suggestions, just send them on to?
well, a couple of things I thought struck me when I read it, and that is that, for example, they talk about one of the wealthiest communities, well, it's the home of many Yale faculty. Well, I think we have a broader base of people here. We certainly have more than our fair share of Yale faculty, that's true, but it goes beyond the Yale faculty, and I think we need to spell that out a little bit further.
The highest percentage of doctoral recipients in the state of Connecticut.
Yeah.
And it's better to say that than that.
Yeah, we have a diversified professional, you know, category, and also.
That's what I would say that it's the home to many of the region's top professionals, academics, and
entrepreneurs.
That's precisely what we want to incorporate here. So that's the type of wordage that we want to get here that I think is more representative of what we are as a community. That was one. The other is that I really think that while they talk about the Park Association and the Woodbridge Historical, I think we want to indicate that we do have an extensive hiking trails, but we also have tremendous recreation facilities beyond that. Now with the the acquiring of Woodbridge Country Club, we have an 18-hole golf, a very highly respected golf course. So we should weave that into here to show that we are a great place for not only schools, but for quality of life living, the recreational values that we have. Tennis courts, for example.
Of course.
Of course. Yeah. Anyway, my point is that those are some points that I think that should be added.
I mean, I don't know how you'd say this, but certainly one of the things that comes to mind is that of all the residential choices in this region, Woodbridge is the most like the areas of Fairfield County that people associate with that sort of lifestyle relative to the New York region. Mm-hmm. So Woodbridge in a way functions relative to the New Haven region, much like, say, a place like New Canaan functions relative to the larger New York City region. I don't know how you go about saying that, but it is an important role that Woodbridge plays in the larger community. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to excuse myself.
Thank you very much.
I promised Roger that I would make some inquiries among colleagues of mine who are in a position to know something about how these foreign companies are making decisions. I know enough to know that there are an awful lot of public officials on the plane heading over to China. I think mostly they're looking for investment dollars, but some of them are probably courting certain kinds of businesses. It's a little bit tricky because Chinese companies, of course, would have to have a very powerful reason to have an outpost in a place where the cost of doing business is just an order of magnitude different than what they experience in China. I mean, the pull, as we all know, tends to be in the other direction. But as these companies in China mature and move into world markets, they'll do more and more what Japanese companies have done over the years, and German companies, which is that they will have corporate
That's the idea. Maybe to get ahead
outposts.
But if you look at our cost of square footage here in New Haven or in the New Haven area, it's got to be lower than it would be in Boston or Fairfield County or some other places.
Wouldn't they come this way for sales marketing reasons?
To some
The
extent.
taxes.
Yeah, yeah, but, I mean, I don't know enough about this end of things to know whether they're doing that.
Right, it's an idea. I'm
Whether
not
they're
saying
doing
it's-
that in a transitory way, or whether they're, you know, in a position now making more permanent
Right.
investments.
Yeah.
But it's certainly worth finding out about.
And that's the point.
Yeah,
Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
exactly.
Okay, thank you very
Good,
much.
good. See you all
Thank you.
soon.
Good. Let's move to the outreach program, and specifically, in conjunction with that, we talked about the July concerts, and we talked about trying to offer businesses an opportunity. Anything more or anything further on that? I know on the outreach, aside from the July concerts, I did speak to some people down at Crest, and I did, one of the owners, and I did offer an opportunity to meet with him shortly and to let him know that we're here to support his business and to help him in ways. So he's thinking about ways in which we as a town can help him, and that's one example of developing or starting a communication point with some of these business people, so that they know that they have a friend here in Town Hall with your administration, with our commission, that's trying to be proactive and helpful to diminish their problems or deal with them before they escalate into something that really is terrible.
He's advertising more too.
Well, it looks like it was left,
Mika
was going to do some work with the town on logistics, including production and dissemination of the communication.
Right.
So I don't know what he has or hasn't done.
Again, he apologized because he had a business RFP that was due, and he's home working on that as we speak. But we'll get that and try to circulate that so that we can figure out when, who we can offer that as a
When is the first concert?
As a possibility.
Does
So it's first week of July, right?
First Tuesday in July.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We're only a couple weeks away. Do we want to, were we still thinking about 10 businesses at concert, was that number? And so do we want to, how do we want to start targeting? Is there a specific way, or do we want to generalize it?
I think we can generalize it at least initially, and then let's see, you know, who
We only have about 2 weeks.
Well, I think what Gary's getting at, who are these 10 going to be for the first? Yeah.
Do you want us to send, I mean, I have an email list of about 70 businesses.
That's what,
Should I send
I
an
think we
email
should
out?
send it
see
to
what
all
kind of
70 and
response
then
we
say
get?
we may have limited space, but right now, how many are interested?
Right.
And then we'll see if we can accommodate as many as possible.
We just coordinated that with Jim Franco.
Yeah, well, I've been in contact with him, but if we can get 40 businesses to do it, we'll
Sure.
do 10
Right.
at a
I mean, if that were the case, maybe we would, you know, use Meeting House Lane and control the traffic there and make it into something that would be worthwhile.
There may be enough property that you can do it right within that whole
Could
field
be.
area.
I think we
I think
might.
you can, yeah.
Or maybe the parking lot over there where the EMS.
Well, right on the green there.
You can do it right on the
Yeah.
green, Jim.
That's where the people
Jim
are.
said he'll come.
Yeah, now,
stop.
and you know, that's true, because they now relocate the band down at our gazebo,
That's right, yeah.
and
Bandstand.
there's a lot of bandstand. Is that what you call it?
Well,
What's the official word?
it's the maestro.
Yeah.
Maestro place. All right, so that's fine. So let's see what can go out and what we'll get back. I think that's a good idea.
But do we expect that there'll be other than an email that goes out, which is great, and getting as much, you know, as much participation, a communication piece? I mean, are we actually, or is it?
And what about calling up either the Bulletin or the Amity Observer and getting an article that we are opening up this as an opportunity to buy local, and then maybe you could give a statement that this is something that you're pursuing and we're testing it out. Hasn't been done before, but if we have 50 or 100 people there, let them understand.
I think the idea is to solicit those who come.
Right, and the idea is to help local businesses buy local. In other words, if people knew that there was goods and services by a certain business.
Well, I think we have a registered list of about 200 businesses too, that we can always, if we want to draft up a quick letter, we can send it right out to in the mail. And that's what we did with that chamber piece
Right.
recently. So if you want to have a mass mailing, we have a
Well,
list
I
of
think
200
I
businesses.
think a short little PR announcement in the newspaper, too, just that.
Both.
Right.
One feeds on the other, reinforces the other.
Create public awareness of.
Right. But again, the point to emphasize is we're encouraging buying local, and we're giving local businesses an opportunity to get exposure to Woodbridge residents.
That's the message of the.
Yeah, I think the newspaper piece can really help generate some excitement too, and, attendance of the concerts too.
And in light of the fact we've been mentioning this on cable, that some people will, be aware of what's going on, and hopefully that will help.
Got the Oak Hill meeting.
Okay.
It's another note.
Do we need to establish any kind of a short list of guidelines for the people that will be there showing this, whatever they're showing, so that,
You remember last time we had discussion about the sponsors and the sensitivity we need to show for that? So that is something, I think that's what Mika was going to find out. Who's sponsoring each one?
Is it usually like the Lions Club and the?
We thought it was businesses, didn't it? Or- I
Is
don't
it-
I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So we give them sort of a premier.
Yeah, we'll give them the
I
premier
think the
space.
Rotary
They get the
sponsors
premier
it.
space.
Right, they're
Let's
just,
say there's
not a
a
problem,
table,
but
there
just
could be
sensitive to
a
it,
small
that they get
table.
the premier space.
Or, like a 10-foot.
What I mean?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Something
yeah.
stand out.
Yeah.
And we were saying, to answer Barry's question, maybe there'd be a 10-foot area so that they know that they could, that would be the size of either a table or what they might have to promote their services. So we set some sort of parameter. They're not going to have, an unlimited amount of space, but that would be at least something at this point that would help them plan for this.
right.
Showing. Okay?
Just on this topic, if you don't mind me sharing this with Outreach, anyone ever hear of the Westville Village Renaissance Alliance?
The Westville?
Yeah,
No.
I think that it's sort of like the Orange Economic Corp. It's a nonprofit, it's a
Is that
group.
connected with the artist community and what?
I think it's beyond that. I thought Westville just sort of had this sort of artist sort of group, but I think now it's merchants. And they had a get-together for realtors. And there's actually a book that they put together that lists every piece of property in Westville, and its whole mission is to expand its economic base. So I just thought that it was something that maybe we ought to be aware of. And maybe, I'll pass this around, but you're the head of Outreach, the subcommittee? I don't know who is.
For the chambers or something?
No,
No,
for
for
here.
us,
Or West.
we have a subcommittee with,
Oh, Chris and myself, yes.
yeah.
You could even like just look at the inventory they put together, which is things that I think we ought to start, getting our hands around. And when you think, not that you want to look at it, it's all a competitive world, but you look at Orange, which faces us on one side, and Westville, which is right down the street, they're really well organized. You know?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe this was done when they established the BID, the Business Improvement District, because they,
I'm not sure. This event I went to last week, the book is just out. I know that the author, he's written several books about, he's an architect, and he, along with others, put together the real estate book. But it could be, I don't know. But isn't that inventory sort of something,
They only have 2 banks.
Yeah, how many do we have? Isn't that?
More something in Woodbridge, we have only.
Probably,
That's it, probably there are too many.
The lower end ones.
There's only one Peoples.
But they have how much vacant land, all that stuff.
Okay, which brings us to subcommittee. Do we want to, what's the feeling of the members here in terms of maybe July and August are months where people are pretty hectic and busy, but maybe we want to establish something in the way of subcommittee meetings?
Well, I think if we can get this gentleman from the DOT here in July, the sooner the better. I think that's very important, because that's going to be the moving thing here.
Okay. All right, so let's, again, I think, I don't have a calendar here, but that Tuesday is what day is Tuesday? I may be out of town the third week, but maybe, let's take a look at dates here. To see if we can try to nail down
The
the
third
time.
Tuesday is the 21st.
Won't that conflict with the council?
Well, that's true, yeah.
You don't have a meeting and take all the...
Good point. Thank goodness we're thinking, you're thinking ahead.
You're right, those are all, there are 4 Tuesdays in July.
Thanks.
Right. Or
So maybe we could take a look at that, at the 14th, or the 14th? What about meeting on the 14th?
Is that Tuesday?
That's a Tuesday. But why don't we make on the 15th? Yeah, I'm just saying, the 14th is a Tuesday, so we'd want to make it on the 15th?
Okay.
That Wednesday, is that a Board of,
No,
Board of Selectmen meeting?
no.
Inland wetlands.
Thank you.
Inland
Wetlands,
wetlands.
but that probably would conflict with,
It'll affect this room, it'll affect this room, that's all.
do you want to go on the 16th?
16th?
Let's go on the 16th then.
Okay.
Thank you for being, so helpful.
You're good.
16th would be for Board of Finance unless they change it.
Well, I'm wondering if that's here too, but
It
even
is,
if.
it is, yeah.
It is, busy time
Didn't you
here.
used to work here, Roger?
No, I forget
What if
things.
we go the following week? Yeah, we go Wednesday the 22nd?
How about that?
No, I'm going to be out of, I think I may not, I have a commitment on the 20th.
How about
What about the
Monday?
20?
How about
No, I have that.
The 20th, how about the 20th?
I
No?
have a commitment that
Okay.
that's going to complicate my life.
Okay.
How about the 7th of July, the first Monday, or first Tuesday?
I don't know if we're ready, are we ready for that?
We have the concert that night, don't we?
Yeah, we don't want that.
Oh, on Tuesday.
But Monday, Tuesdays, what about the 24th? Or the 23rd? Board of Finance doesn't meet then.
No,
Thursday, the 23rd?
Shall we try the 23rd?
good, okay.
Good. All right. So it can be, well, we'll find out where it'll be. So July 23rd, we can start to plan, hopefully there'll be DOT and we'll.
Nice.
So then, Roger, how are we going to handle this letter? We're going to wait till the 23rd?
Which letter is that?
The one we just discussed with Professor Potts. Isn't he going to, are we going to wait till that?
We're going to try to get into his queue.
If you have any comments about this, you
Should
should
we
send it to him, to Gladys.
Send it to him?
And copy, I think copy Jerry or copy Ed.
And then
So
he'll
we have that.
revise this, and then give it to, maybe give it to him that night or whatever, maybe before, whatever.
Wait a month to get it to him.
What about the timing of, we were talking about June teeing up the memorandum as we just did, but then also follow up with P and Z and Joe Crisco and Thomas for July. We had talked about what about.
Well, if we had DOT coming here, it would seem it would be logical for them to be there as well, because that would be, very informative. It would probably save them some time meeting with them and getting up to speed on what we're trying to accomplish. So maybe that's, all encompassing on the 23rd.
Okay.
When we mentioned meeting with DOT, are we at this point even on the radar screen of DOT?
We are, yeah.
We are?
Yep.
I don't be too early.
It's
It's never going to be too early to get your foot in the door here, yeah.
And to learn,
Right.
if we learn what we can influence, then we know what to say and how to say it. And it doesn't seem like we're, being too out of line with what is, they're thinking what is feasible. Okay? Good. I guess, because, again, we try to keep this meeting moving along. The other area was what our role is for the Country Club of Woodbridge, which is open and functioning and attracting people and, exciting.
That's the new name, Country Club of Woodbridge, right.
Have we bought it yet? Is it-
No, we have not yet. With the closing will be on or about August 1st. We have the environmental aspect of this we have to examine, and we've retained an environmental expert who's looking into it now, so that's...
That was the phase 2, right?
Yeah, actually, we started with phase 1 because the phase 1 that was done actually by somebody hired by Mr. Reese was done when there was snow on the ground. So that's That's no good for DEP standards. So we're just completing phase 1 right now. We'll have that report shortly, and then there'll be a proposal for how much it'll cost to do phase 2, and that will require some testing. And then we will know then what it will be required to rectify whatever environmental condition is on that project.
You know, it's the scope of the problem,
Right.
small,
Exactly.
medium, large, or whatever,
Right, exactly.
and the cost of remediation.
Right.
Good.
Do we expect there to be a problem?
There is some environmental concerns there, yeah.
From what though?
Where? For what?
Well, from
They-
dumping and from,
They have their maintenance facility there. They have a maintenance.
we don't know the extent.
We don't.
But
The
there is.
good news is they didn't have an underground
address.
I don't think they had they have an above-ground tank, so we're not going to run into maybe some of the problems we had with our underground tank. So in that regard, maybe the expectations are less than more. But again, I think it's a prudent thing that is doing, and you know, we go into it with our eyes open, not get blindsided. Having played Woodbridge, the condition, the course is great.
That's what I heard.
You can have something to eat. They're getting their liquor license, so it's developing into hopefully what we hope it will be a benefit to residents and a means of making some money and you know, paying for some of or most of what it cost us to acquire and maintain that facility.
Ed, do we know if Matt is going to start running banquets or having events at that anytime soon?
I know that's his intention, so, you know, there's a number to call.
Yeah.
We'll get you the number if you don't have it, and you can talk directly to him. But, yes, he's in the process of renovating that kitchen.
Right.
And so that's his intention, yeah.
Right. His intention, the tennis courts, I think that they
There
were
are 2 tennis courts
they
that
were
are
open
open
already. I think they have 2 or 3 events, Garrett, that have been booked already.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I think they broke the ice when I spoke to John over the weekend.
Okay.
So bit by bit.
And the house is for sale?
Yes, house is in foreclosure, yeah.
So, you know, these are all issues that are starting to come along, and they'll get the awareness out of the fact that the course is open. And from comments that I've heard, people that have been at other country clubs that come back and want to play and have played, they're very happy. So this is a good start.
As in the case of Longshore, you know, Roger, which you had mentioned, town owns it, operated Parks and Recreation. You go on their website and you can, I mean, it's all there. From an economic development perspective, or just from the perspective of having something available, do we have something in the works to you know, have this out on a website? And
It should be on the town website now.
Right.
is it out there?
Yeah, that's what I'm told. I haven't checked it myself, but, so the basic, what the fee structure is and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And helping just publicize. That's,
One of the reasons we're talking today is hopefully there'll be, you know, more awareness of the fact they're open, and the rates are very reasonable compared to what might be at a Milford club. I won't mention names, but I mean, you know, with a very sophisticated course like, or a very enjoyable course, sometimes too difficult, but it's an excellent course that compares very favorably with the best in the state. So we're fortunate. With that said, I think you know, they're still, I guess you're still trying to figure out, you know, assuming everything goes through as planned, then there'll be opportunities, I guess, for us to make an input on how we can fully utilize the economic value of the country club. And that would be a discussion that we would have at the appropriate time to see how it fits in, Ed, to your plans and what we can do to help.
Maybe appointing someone from this committee as a member of the so-called country club committee.
Yeah. Is there going to be an oversight and then one to recommend an RFP?
There's not going to be any oversight as such. I mean, he's running this on the 18-month agreement we have. He's open to recommendations, but this is his production.
Right. Okay. So the question is, you know, how we're going to develop that, knowing that he is going to be the operator for the next year and a half.
18 months, right?
And then figure out.
We plan at this point to put that out to bid
Okay.
for others to bid on, and we will have a number of concerns that we'll want addressed in that process.
Who would be the conduit for ideas of how to develop the property?
Well, as I say, I think we're going to appoint this, once we acquire this property, this
Then there'll be a committee that will be the
Right.
official committee for that.
We'll
Okay.
be recommending to the Board of Selectmen what to do.
I hear it. Okay. Sort of like what they have in the way of a building committee for various projects. This would
Right.
be a
Right.
clearinghouse for ideas
Right.
and recommendations.
Sounds very reasonable.
Country Club Committee.
Good. All right, with that, is there anything?
And is there any news on the 55 and up?
We did meet with representatives of the Woodbridge Estates last Thursday.
Yeah, okay. Did they go before,
No, this is myself and Tony Genovese and Terry Gilbert.
Joseph?
Yeah. And we're concerned about the condition of those 3 houses on Litchfield Turnpike. And so we asked them to secure those properties, to board them up. I think they've done that. They said they would be cutting the grass there and making it look more presentable. We also told them that they should consider demolishing those.
Great.
And so they're going to get back to us on that. And if that's not forthcoming, then we will do what we think is necessary to correct that situation.
Good.
So,
Barry?
but it's as far, and then to go further on that, I think they're intending to come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission to try to, and I don't want to speak for them, but this is my understanding, that to maybe do this project in phases. So that's the matter with the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Yeah, that they'll have to decide. I got it. Thank you.
Good. Barry?
I had mentioned before about the concept of maybe somebody from this committee being a part of that, the golf or country club committee. And before we moved on, I thought we should just come back to that for a second, because in the last meeting, we talked about just that, having, if possible, some form of representation. So I guess my question is, what are the steps, if any, required to try to get somebody from our committee into that group?
I think we can't do anything until we actually own it, I mean, to really get involved in this, so that will come subsequent to August 1st.
Gotcha.
So, but we'll, maybe we'll take a recommendation from your group, or we'll appoint some, we'll see how it works.
Fair enough.
I think what you're saying is, let's acquire it.
Right, let's own it.
And let's own it first, and then we're going to step up, because the problem's not going to happen in August. This would be something that would happen in the fall to populate this committee, and then at least they'll be a better.
And under our agreement with Manchetti, at the end of the year, he's going to provide us with, an accounting of his income and rounds of golf and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be materials that committee would be reviewing.
Sure.
And then whatever else, your own experience and experience of others.
And I would think as a committee, whoever is going to be a part of that that development committee, or the use of the land committee, we as a committee should be thinking about what we as a committee want to recommend, either through an individual or not. I mean, we're supposed to know what's going on in town and what has value to the town, and that is an economic asset for the town. So now the question is how it can be utilized. So I think that's part of our charge, is to think and to come up with suggestions and see how they're received.
And just to let you know, as far as those who can use it, there's a differential between Woodbridge residents and non-Woodbridge residents, and we've included under Woodbridge residents all employees of the town of Woodbridge and all employees of the Amity School District, and that's acceptable to Mr. Manchetti. So that broadens the base of people and encourages
So that's what we want, people who work and stay here.
Right. So,
I spend money here.
And there are, I know for a fact too, that there are a number of individuals who have already signed and given the $3,500 to be a member.
To be a member?
To be a member. And that $3,500 allows unlimited golf with no fee for a golf cart. Usually a member might have to pay
unlimited 18-hole play. Yeah.
Exactly. And use of the range and lockers and a discount for when the pool opens. So it's really quite for those that want the privilege and the convenience. There's some advanced tee times that you have to sign up for, but you can get ahead of the curve because you get preferential. The lead time there is less for members. It really is starting to attract a lot of members, and that's good news.
Then they pay for the day price too?
They're developing a day price for tenants, or they do for golf, that's for sure.
They do for golf too?
Day price for tenants, and then when the pool, when that opens, there's some repairs that have to be made to the pool, so that hasn't been done yet, but that's in the works.
That's great.
And there are two tiers, just to qualify. For golf, there's a weekend rate for members and for those, for town members and former members that aren't, signed up with this $3,500 arrangement. And then weekdays, it's even less.
So there's a 9-hole and an 18-hole.
Right.
And if you want to walk the course, there's a separate rate.
Right.
A separate rate for a cart.
Right.
That's
So it's very, very reasonable.
Well, it's like a public, it's already being run like a public course. Right?
Right.
Yeah. And they're getting a response. They're getting a good response.
Great.
Is there a resident golf pro?
Yes, there is. The
Somebody
golf
gets
pro who was
lessons
at
there.
Woodbridge
Yeah.
is still there, and he's got all his PGA approvals and license, and he's a golf pro, a very charming and very knowledgeable guy. Hasn't improved my game, not because he hasn't tried. But he is a very competent, and we're fortunate to have him stay on. So, with that, as a matter of fact, I went there on Sunday, and after the game, I had a bowl of clam chowder that was, absolutely as good as they come. And it was just a delight to be able, the sun was out. First of all, that was a delight. It was delightful to be there and to enjoy, that little,
Is that in the dining room?
The dining room is open to members who play golf, and they can go there for something to eat. They're waiting for their liquor license. So after we got a bowl of soup, sat there and enjoyed. Well, I didn't think my game was that good, but I enjoyed the afternoon.
Isn't the restaurant open to the public here?
It will be, yes, yeah. The restaurant, I don't think is open as such, is it?
No.
Oh, I see.
Oh, they're still working on details on that.
Okay.
Well,
Okay, well, if there's any other questions?
Kitchen and the snack.
I think they're going to be, when they open, there's both a kitchen and there's a snack bar down on the level of the pool.
Right.
So the beauty of that is you can get hot dogs and hamburgers and sandwiches and still enjoy the pool. And it's just a very good setup. Okay, any other questions, any other comments? I'll ask for adjournment.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.